Grim morning and welcome to the Grim. I'm your host, Kristen. On today's episode, we'll be opening the gate and entering Montmartre Cemetery, located in Paris, France. So grab your favorite mug, cozy up, and let's take a dig in history. Paris, the city of love, art, and cuisine. Millions flock here to bask in its beauty, strolling along the Seine, marveling at the grandeur of the Eiffel Tower, and indulging in its famed pastries. But beneath the city's romantic facade lies an unspoken truth. People just don't live here, they die here too. While the Grim will eventually open the gates to some of Paris's larger, more infamous cemeteries, today we slip into the quiet embrace of Montmartre Cemetery, a hidden gem nestled within the shadows of the famed neighborhood that shares its name. Unlike the grand avenues of Père Lachaise or Montparnasse, Montmartre Cemetery is a place of forgotten souls, of artists and dreamers whose legacies whisper through the narrow, winding paths. Yet when people hear Montmartre, they think of something far more lively. The red glow of the Moulin Rouge, the notorious can-can dancers, and the decadent nightlife that pulses through the heart of this quarter. So why focus on a less grander, more overlooked burial ground, you ask? Because while travelers capture the polished facade of a city, it's the overlooked corners, the dirt, the crime, the tucked away boroughs like Montmartre that truly shape its soul. Montmartre isn't without its share of visitors, though. Landmarks like Sacré-Cœur and the bustling nightlife ensure its streets are never empty. But few linger long enough to venture into its cemetery, where the echoes of Paris's past whisper behind weathered tombstones, waiting for those curious enough to listen. Montmartre is far from small. In fact, it rests upon a forgotten quarry with a sinister past. Before it became one of Paris's most hauntingly beautiful necropolises, this landmark witnessed to mass burials, revolutions, and the city's desperate struggle with the dead. Like many growing cities of its time, Paris in the late 18th century faced a crisis of the dead. Overcrowded cemeteries, funeral costs skyrocketing beyond the reach of the poor, and unsanitary conditions that turned entire neighborhoods into festering grounds of decay. With bodies piling up in the shallow graves and the air thick with the stench of death, something had to be done. In 1780, the city made a drastic decision: abandon burials within Paris's limits. Cemeteries like the infamous Cemetery des Innocents was shut down. The remains exhumed and relocated to what we now know as the Paris catacombs. To manage the overflow, new burial grounds were established beyond the city's heart, each marking a different direction. Père Lachaise to the east, Passy to the west, Montparnasse to the south, and Montmartre to the north. Yet Montmartre's story is unlike any other. The land chosen for the cemetery was not an untouched field, but an abandoned gypsum quarry, a deep hollow pit carved into the earth. Before becoming a final resting place for Paris's elite, it served a darker purpose during the French Revolution, as a mass grave for those whose lives were taken in the conflict, or some rumors say the guillotine. The quarry's depths became a silent witness to some of the bloodiest days in France's history, no doubt, swallowing the remains of countless revolutionaries and aristocrats alike. It wasn't until January 1st, 1825, that the site was formally transformed into a cemetery. Originally known as the Cemetery des Grands Quarries, the Cemetery of Large Quarries. Over time, it became known as the Cemetery de Montmartre, after the famed neighborhood that surrounded it. Unlike its sprawling counterpart Père Lachaise, Montmartre Cemetery is quieter, more intimate, a sanctuary of winding paths, elaborate tombs, and hidden stories. Nestled beneath the bustling Place des Clochers, Montmartre Cemetery exists below street level, giving it an eerie, secluded feel. Unlike most cemeteries with grand, sweeping entrances, Montmartre's sole gateway is hidden beneath Rue Calancourt's bridge on Avenue Racao, forcing visitors to descend into its past, stepping down into the very earth that once swallowed its dead. Despite its grim origins, Montmartre Cemetery has grown into one of Paris's most beloved final resting places, home to artists, writers, composers, and dreamers who left an indelible mark on history. Yet the past lingers like a ghostly breath in the stillness, woven into the shadows of weathered mausoleums, etched into crumbling epitaphs, and murmured through the ages by those who refuse to be forgotten. A renowned landmark of Paris, Montmartre Cemetery serves as the eternal home to many celebrated artists who once lived, created, and found inspiration in the vibrant streets of Montmartre. Some hidden within the grounds in plain sight if you're unaware of what you're seeking. Famously known by his last name Degas, the tomb of God might not be familiar to many, but this tomb holds one of Paris's renowned artists, Edward Degas, the embatic master of movement and shadow. He was born Hilaire Germain Edward Degas on July 19th, 1834, in Paris, France. Though often associated with the ethereal light of Impressionists, he walked a darker path, shunning the label and instead embracing a world of dimly lit studios, weary dancers, and figures trapped in frozen gestures, haunted by motion they could never escape. Raised in a wealthy banking family, Degas' future seemed destined for the refined corridors of high society. Yet the ghostly pull of art proved irresistible. His father, sensing the restless spirit within his son, encouraged him to pursue the classical training of the École de Beaux-Arts, where he studied under Louis Lamothe, absorbing the secrets of line and composition like an artist possessed. His journey led him to Italy, where he copied the great Renaissance masters, their solemn figures and spectral beauty, leaving an indelible mark on his soul. But it was the gaslit opera houses and shadowed ballet studios of Paris that Degas found his true obsession. The fragile, ghostly forms of ballerinas caught mid step, frozen in time as if trapped between the realms of the living and the dead. More than half his works would depict these spectral figures, their gaunt faces and contorted limbs moving to the silent music of the past. In pieces like The Dance Class in 1874 and L'Obstance in 1876, his subjects appeared almost possessed, their vacant gazes and slumped forms hinting at a darker world than the elegance they performed for their audiences. His art was relentless, feverish, his vision extending beyond mere canvas to bronze sculptures, his most famous being The Little Dancer of 14 Years in 1881. With its waxen flesh and glassy eyes, this unsettling figure blurred the lines between the real and the unreal, disturbing critics who found her too lifelike, too uncanny, a doll that might stir at midnight when no one was watching. Yet for all his technical mastery, Degas was a man consumed by isolation. He never married, nor did he seek the companionship of his peers. His temper was notorious, his sharp tongue cutting down friends and critics alike. His anti Semitic views, exasperated by the Dreyfus affair, alienated him from lifelong friends, including the artist Ludovic Havy and art dealer Durand Radu. By the end of his life, he had driven almost everyone away, retreating further into himself as he aged, and blindness crept upon him, an eerie affliction that stripped him of the very sight that had defined his genius. In his final years, Degas roamed the streets of Paris alone, a spectral figure with failing vision and a mind trapped in the past. His Rue Victor Massey studio, once filled with energy of his work, stood abandoned when he was forced to move in 1912. He spent his last days in a fog of confusion, muttering to himself and aimlessly wandering the boulevards like one of his own ghostly figures. When he died on September 27th, 1917, it was as if he already faded from the world. Yet Degas was never truly gone. His ballerinas remained forever posed, their feet aching beneath the layers of tulle, their faces tight with concentration. His bathers continued their rituals in silent solitude, unaware they were being watched. His jockeys caught mid-race never to cross the finish line. His world is one of perpetual motion, figures always moving, yet forever trapped in place like the artist within his tomb. Within the same deep quarry grounds lies a man whose name echoes in both literature and lament, Alexandre Dumas' fils. Born illegitimate yet destined for literary immortality, Dumas' fils entered the world on July 27th, 1824, in Paris, a city of grandeur, shadows, and scandal. His father, the legendary Alexandre Dumas Pierre, acknowledged him only years later, plucking him from his mother's arms and casting him into the world of privilege and prestige. The agony of his mother's loss imprinted itself upon his soul, shaping his obsessions, his tragedies, and his specters of doomed women that would forever haunt his writings. Dumas' Fils walked a path lined with murmurs of scandal and judgment, a child born of divided blood and fractured lineage. Dumas' Fils walked a path lined with murmurs of scandal and judgment, a child born of divided blood and fractured lineage. His great grandparents had been a French nobleman and a Haitian woman of color, a heritage that made him both an outsider and an inheritor of a name burdened with expectation. At school, he was ridiculed, his mixed lineage and his illegitimacy a source of cruel torment from his peers. He buried himself in books, in words, in the ghostly echoes of the past that would later find their way into his novels and plays. At 20, he followed his father to Saint Germain en Laye, and there fate placed him in the path of Marie Duplessis, a young French courtesan whose fragile beauty and tragic fate would change him forever. She was the muse who would inspire his most famous work, La Democa Camellia, the Lady of the Camellias, a story of love, loss, and death's cruel embrace. Transformed into a stage play and later into Verdi's opera La Traviata, the tale immortalized the doomed Coruscant, casting her into eternal limelight, just as consumption had cast her into an early grave. Success found him quickly, but unlike his father, Dumas Fils was no seeker of adventure or excess. He lived beneath the specter of morality, obsessed with redemption, responsibility, and the sins of men. In his play Le Fils Naturel, The Illegitimate Son, he preached the duty of fathers to claim their bastard children, a reflection perhaps of the wound left behind by his own uncertain origins. He became the voice of tragic women, lost souls, the damned, and the disgraced. Yet his own life was not without its ghosts. He married Nagia Narishkina, who bore him a daughter, but death soon stole her away. He later then wed Henrietta Rainier, though whether he ever escaped the long shadow of his first love remains unknown. In 1874, he was granted a seat among the immortals at the Académie Française, and by 1894 he was honored with the Légion d'honneur, his name etched into history. But even prestige could not protect him from time's grasp. On November 27, 1895, Dumas' Fils succumbed to the inevitable, drawing his last breath in the quiet of Marly de Roure. Now he rests within the shrouded embrace of Montmartre Cemetery, buried just meters away from Marie Duplessis, the woman who he made immortal, the woman whose story would outlive them both. Whether by fate or by force more spectral, the two remain bound together in death, just as they had been in legend. Some say a cold hush lingers near their graves, an invisible hand tracing the path between the headstones, as if time itself refuses to let their story be forgotten. Perhaps in the silence of Montmartre, Dumas' Fils still senses her presence, tethered to him across eternity. Paris, a city of art, passion, and whispered tragedies. Among its grand boulevards and candlelit salons, a woman once reigned, not as queen, but as a fleeting apparition of beauty and sorrow. In the notorious city of Paris, among its grand boulevards and candlelit salons, a woman once reigned, not as queen, but as the fleeting apparition of beauty and sorrow. Marie Duplessis, a courtesan draped in silk and mystery, her fate as fragile as the camellias she wore. Her life was a dance with destiny, a tale of glamour, seduction, and the slow, inevitable grasp of death. She enchanted poets, composers, and aristocrats, yet no man could hold on to her for long. And when her time came, she simply did not pass. She left behind a legend, an echo in the wind, a love story that would outlive even Paris itself. Born Alphonsine Rose Plessis on a cold January night in 1824, she would one day haunt the salons of Paris, captivating the hearts of poets, aristocrats, and composers alike. But beneath the lace and allure, her fate was already written, as fleeting as the flowers she wore. By 15, she left the gray fields of Normandy, stepping into Paris's glittering abyss, where the city's shadows swallowed girls like her whole. She was clever, though, far too clever, for she learned that beauty was currency and she would spend hers wisely. She honored her wit, educated herself, and carved a place among high society that had no room for girls like her. She added the nobility of due to her name, fashioning herself anew as Marie Duplessis, the most coveted courtesan in all of Paris. By 16, she was no mere girl, but a ghost of every man's desire, her presence an enchantment, her name carried in murmurs through gilded halls and candlelit chambers. Politicians, artists, and poets flocked to her salon, enchanted by her elegance, her sharp mind, and the soft tragedy that lingered behind her smile. She had many lovers, yet it was Alexandre Dumas' fils who would etch her name into eternity. For a fleeting moment, they belonged to each other, a tragic love story destined to be inked into the pages of history. When he left her, she fell into the arms of Franz Liszt, the tormented composer who spoke to spirits through music and wished to take her away from Paris. But no man could ever truly claim Marie Duplessis, for she belonged to the night, to the fleeting world of the courtesan, where love was ephemeral and devotion was measured in francs. She briefly married to a count, but it was no salvation, only another chapter in her inevitable decline. At 23, her lungs betrayed her, and the city she conquered stood still. On February 3rd, 1847, tuberculosis stole her from her lovers, from her admirers, from Paris itself. She died not in grandeur, but in debt, her silks and jewels auctioned off to settle the cost of her fleeting life. Montmartre Cemetery opened its gates for her, welcoming her with its cold embrace. Hundreds gathered draped in mourning, whispering her name as if summoning a ghost. But her story was far from over. Dumas could not let her rest. He resurrected her as Marie Gautier in La Demoga Camellia, a tale that would be woven into opera and film, forever transforming her into a tragic legend. Giuseppe Verdi gave her another life in La Traviata, his notes ringing with sorrow, with love, and with the echoes of the woman who once was. Today, her tomb in Montmartre Cemetery remains untouched by time, a place where lovers and dreamers leave white camellias upon the stone. Some say on quiet nights when the moonlight spills over the graves, a perfume lingers in the air, the ghostly scent of flowers that never fade. Marie Duplessis is long gone, but her legend refuses to be buried. The echo of Marie Duplessis' tragic beauty lingers in Montmartre Cemetery, her delicate presence immortalized in legend, literature, and opera. But Montmartre's spectral stage holds another infamous star, one whose presence was far louder, more boisterous, and unforgettable in life. Enter La Goulue, the untamed queen of a can-can, whose revelry once shook the foundations of the Moulin Rouge itself. Born Louise Weber in 1866, La Goulue clawed her way out of obscurity, fueled by an insatiable thirst for indulgence, both in dance and drink. As a young girl working in laundry, she would steal away borrowed silks and lace, parading through Paris's ballrooms as though she belonged there, and in time she did. Her wild spirit and audacious performances transformed her from a mere entertainer to an icon of Montmartre's nightlife, a tempest of movement and mischief. They called her La Goulue, the glutton, not only for the way she devoured the dance floor, but for her infamous habit of snatching drinks from patrons' tables mid-performance, guzzling them without breaking her feverish rhythm. In the dim glow of the Moulin Rouge, beneath the watchful gaze of Toulouse-Lautrec, who would later capture her infamous spirit in his legendary posters, La Goulue was unstoppable. She taunted men, kicking off their hats with precise flicks of her foot, and twirling her skirts to reveal the embroidered heart on her knickers, sending the crowd into a frenzy. She was the highest paid performer of her time, the Queen of Montmartre, an untamed storm of sequins and scandal. But as quickly as she ascended, she fell. Greedy for independence, she left the Moulin Rouge in 1895, determined to claim her fame on her own terms. Instead, her fortune abandoned her, and the roaring crowds who once chanted her name turned silent. Her self-funded traveling show collapsed into failure. Her riches dwindled, and she was left with only the memories of her glory days, drowned in abstinence and regret. By 1928, the woman who had once ruled Montmartre returned, not as a star but as a shadow. Bloated, weathered, and unrecognizable, she haunted the streets outside the very cabaret she once owned, selling peanuts and cigarettes to those who long had forgotten her reign. A year later, death claimed her, and she was buried unceremoniously in the Cemetery de Patin. But fate would not allow her to be cast aside so easily. Her remains were later transferred to Montmartre Cemetery, as if the restless energy of her past demanded she would be returned to the stage of her greatest triumphs. Although the music has faded, La Goulou's spirit still lingers forever. The wind that howls through Montmartre's winding streets carries the echoes of her laughter and the distant applause of an audience that once adored her. She devoured life with an insatiable hunger, reveling in pleasure, fame, and the intoxicating thrill of the stage. Yet, in the end, even the Moulin Rouge could not satisfy her restless soul. The next tomb to never rest easy within Montmartre belongs to Dalida, a European superstar who shone brightly. Yet beneath the glittering facade lay a profound darkness. Her voice, haunting and timeless, carried the weight of love, loss, and longing, a siren song laced with sorrow. Beneath the glamour and intoxicating success lay a soul weighed down by grief, haunted by lovers lost and ghosts that would not let her rest, much like the cemetery she resides in. Born as Ilando Cristina Giolotti in 1933, in the golden glow of Cairo, she was destined for the stage. She first sought the silver screen, but it was music that crowned her. From the moment she sang Bambino, the world was spellbound. Her voice wove spells across continents, carrying her through the decades, through eras of musical evolution. From the smoky cabarets of Paris to the pulsing beats of disco that rattled through the nightclubs in the 1970s, she sang of passion, longing, loss, and the ghosts of her own past. She sang, and the world listened. But even as she conquered the music industry, a shadow clung to her, a dark thread woven through the fabric of her life. Love followed her, but so did tragedy. She loved deeply, but those she loved seemed doomed. Luigi Tenco, the tortured musician, silenced himself in a Sanremo hotel room. Lucien Morisi, her former husband, followed suit years later. The brilliant but tormented Mike Brandt took the same path. And then Richard Chanfrey, the man who called himself an alchemist, inhaled his last breath in a car filled with exhaust fumes. They fell one by one, leaving Dalida to stand alone amidst the wreckage of love lost. Through it all, she stood before the world with grace, hiding the fractures beneath the surface. But even a diva can only bear so much. On a quiet night in May of 1987, she penned her final note. Life is unbearable, please forgive me. She then slipped into the embrace of sleep, aided by barbiturates. She had chosen to still the pain. Dalida now rests in Montmartre Cemetery, where a stone effigy of her likeness gazes solemnly toward the sky. But her voice lingers, a spectral whisper on the wind, a song that refuses to fade. Even in death, Dalida remains, eternally dancing between light and shadow, between triumph and tragedy, forever a queen of the stage and a prisoner of her own sorrow. Montmartre Cemetery is a place where the dead refuse to rest, and the living can never quite shake the feeling that they're being watched. Shadows stretch unnaturally long here, weaving between the tombstones, clinging to the mausoleums, whispering stories of those who came before. Reports of spectral encounters, disembodied murmurs, and an ever present chill make it clear some residents truly never left. For those seeking the grandeur of Parisian burial grounds, Montmartre is a treasure trove of famous and forgotten. The gilded names of Stendhal, Dalida, Alexandre Dumas' feasts draw pilgrims to their solemn markers, but it's the lesser known graves that truly unsettle. Take Francois Truffaut, the acclaimed French director, whose resting place is a simple, unassuming slab of black marble. Too modest, too quiet, as if it's waiting for its moment to speak. Then there's Daniel Oreisis, a French philanthropist whose grave is dominated by a brooding bronze replica of Michelangelo's Moses. His beard coiling like petrified smoke, his piercing gaze daring intruders to move closer. Melancholia or devotion, only the dead will know. Some tombs lead into the strange, like the unsettling lifelike statue of Vladislav Nijinsky, frozen in his role at Petrushka, the ill-fated puppet. A guardian, a warning. Its hollow eyes seem to follow visitors, the face forever twisted in a tragic expression, as if he knows something they don't. Montmartre Cemetery is not just a final resting place, it's a theater of the macabre, where history and mystery intertwine. The famous sleep in their gilded tombs, the forgotten whisper beneath their weathered stones, and the curious who dare to wander may find themselves leaving with more than they bargained for. The grave crime from Montmartre Cemetery was a pink bourbon filtered special from Clove. For more honorary grinds in the area, please visit the-grim.com. For now, we're closing the gate on Montmartre Cemetery. We hope you enjoyed our dig into history. If you did, subscribe today to join us next time when we open the gate on the Grim.